Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is The Thinking Atheist Worldwide.
Related to the topic of discussion on the broadcast today, you're definitely going to want to check out a lecture series by Dr. Jeffrey Rosen at the Great Courses Plus. It's called Privacy, Property, and Free Speech, Law and the Constitution. Jeff Rosen is professor of law at the George Washington University School of Law, and he gets into some really interesting and relevant stuff on this series at the Great Courses Plus. Stuff like, how can there be any expectation of privacy when there are cameras everywhere? Are we honestly protected in our homes and lives against surveillance? How much privacy do we surrender for the cause of quote-unquote national security? How much do advertisers track us? You know, what we do and where we do it. Will we one day lose the rights to our own personhood if genes can be altered and then the alterations to genes can then be copyrighted? It's just fascinating stuff. Right now, you can watch this whole lecture series, Privacy, Property, and Free Speech, and any of their over 8,500 lectures for free at the Great Courses Plus, but you have to sign up with my special URL. Stream or download to any TV, computer, laptop, or smartphone. You can listen like a podcast on their Great Courses Plus app. Explore a host of compelling subjects taught by experts in their fields, and grow your mind. Again, the Great Courses Plus offering my listeners a free and full month of unlimited access to all of their lectures, so don't wait. Sign up right now at thegreatcoursesplus.com/Seth. Remember, thegreatcoursesplus.com/Seth. It was first noticed and reported, at least on the national scale, back in the summer of 2015. The Washington Post published an article in August of 2015 revealing that apparently over a series of previous weeks, police officers and sheriff's deputies and firefighters in Illinois and Kentucky and North Carolina and elsewhere were putting bumper stickers on their vehicles. And the stickers said, "In God We Trust." In a 2015 interview with the Washington Post, Stone County, Missouri Sheriff Doug Rader said he got the idea from another sheriff in Greene County, a guy named Jim Arnott. Now, in July of 2015, the Stone County Sheriff's Office official Facebook page posted this, and I quote, "I'm proud to announce that all of the Stone County Sheriff's Office patrol vehicles now have 'In God We Trust' on the back. This became our national motto in 1956 and is on all of our currency. There has been no better time than now to proudly display our national motto." And included on that Facebook post were several photographs of his police vehicles. And on the back, on the bumper, or on the rear hatches of the SUV or whatever, it said, "In God We Trust," in bold capital letters. Now, I found it interesting that the size and the font of "In God We Trust" was at least twice the size of "Protect and Serve" on the cars, at least on one photograph that he had posted on the Facebook page. And this Facebook post went viral. It just caught like wildfire, liked by over 80,000 people, shared over 36,000 times, almost 5,000 comments, many of those comments sounding like a church service. And happy supporters saying things like this: "It's about time that some officials trust in God. Great. God bless Stone County, and God bless America. Thank you. God is good. I'm happy to see Christians standing up. And now God will watch over for sure." What, we were screwed before they put the sticker on the car? Is that what this commenter is saying? Someone else said, "Now there is a sheriff's office I wouldn't mind getting a ticket from. Thank you, officers." I would like to test this assertion. Whoever this person is, I'd like to see him get pulled over. I would like a dash cam to show what their reaction would be. Oh, it says, "In God we trust. Please give me a citation." There was another commenter, his name is Jared. He said this. He said, "The scum of the earth Freedom from Religion Foundation will probably start crying and moaning over that." Now, on a more encouraging note, some more skeptical commenters also sort of weighed in on this thread. A guy named Ryan said, "I would rather they trust in each other, good training, equipment, and instincts." A guy named Joey said, "It's time for the Satanists to jump in and demand equal representation. It worked for the removal of the Ten Commandments monument, and it will likewise work here." Scott said, "For the record here, folks, the national motto is E pluribus unum. I'm pretty sure you'll find it in your 4th grade history book." Well, of course, Scott's referring to the official motto for the seal of the United States. It was adopted by an act of Congress back in 1792. E pluribus unum. It's Latin. It means out of many, one, or one from many. And the phrase spoke to the concept that out of the union of the original 13 colonies emerged one nation, a single nation, out of many, one. Well, E pluribus unum first appeared on U.S. coinage back in 1795. It was on a $5 gold coin. It was added to various silver coins 3 years later, and then eventually to all coins made from precious metals shortly after that. But no actual law had been established in regard to a national motto. And that changed in the 1950s, almost 2 centuries after the adoption of E pluribus unum. The Cold War was in full swing. McCarthyism had been feeding on and feeding into a national paranoia about atheistic communism infiltrating the United States. Congress was at that time eager to set itself apart from and ostensibly above all those godless commies, those godless commie atheists, right? And so Congress added the words "under God" to the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance in 1954. Again, most of you know, "under God" was not on the original pledge. And an actual law was finally passed in 1956. It changed E pluribus unum to "in God we trust" as the official motto of the seal of the United States. And then some individual states added their own religious language to their own state mottos. Things like, "With God, all things are possible." That's drawn right out of the book of Matthew in the Bible. That became, and it still remains, the state motto of the state of Ohio. Now, obviously, this motto seems kind of strange in the shadow of the First Amendment of the Constitution, ratified in 1791, which states that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Now, I just last month released a 10-minute video that featured constitutional attorney for the FFRF, the Freedom from Religion Foundation. His name is Andrew Seidel. He's a friend, and he's just a really smart guy on the front lines of these conversations. And he addressed "In God We Trust" as a national motto on the money. And the irony of the arguments that it should continue to be there. And the argument is for many that it's more of a historical thing, and it no longer carries any religious significance at all. Here's a short clip from that interview.
"In God we trust" on money. The reason courts have upheld that is because through rote repetition, it has lost all religious significance. Now pause to appreciate the hypocrisy of that, right? Because if the Supreme Court or any other court in the land said that John 3:16 had lost all religious significance through rote repetition, or that the rosary, praying the rosary, was no longer religious, the outcry from the religious side would be enormous and immediate. But they don't care because it's forwarding their agenda.
Okay, well, that brings us back to the Stone County Sheriff's Office and the Freedom from Religion Foundation. FFRF did, in fact, send letters to police and sheriff's departments across the South in Mississippi, Florida, Virginia, North Carolina, and Missouri. And yes, this did include Stone County, Missouri. And in their letters, the FFRF pointed out the obvious, right? That "in God we trust" displayed on these taxpayer-funded vehicles for a police force that represents and is committed to protect citizens that are not just religious, and at the very least, not just Christian, well, this is an act of exclusion. I mean, nearly a quarter of the United States population identifies as non-religious. The government was designed as a secular operation, right? Religious expression, while certainly protected, is an individual exercise. And there's also this overarching concern that the police officers might be declaring that they are more interested in serving a God than serving the letter of the law. I had the opportunity to speak to another staff attorney at the Freedom from Religion Foundation, Maddie Ziegler, to talk about her perspective as an attorney on this In God We Trust controversy.
Yeah, we have contacted many police departments and sheriff's offices across the country, but we've pulled back on letter writing because we weren't getting very good responses and refocused our resources into potential litigation.
Have you seen in your experience as an attorney any other examples of police departments sort of overstepping in this way when it comes to religion?
I think it's pretty common for religiosity and law enforcement to be overly intertwined. We see a lot of police chaplaincies where they'll have, basically in-house clergy members associated with them.
So if a police officer is involved in some traumatic event, the option is automatically a religious one by default?
Yeah, that's what they're meant to do, is to counsel police officers and be there for their problems, but also sometimes to even interact with the public. A lot of times they'll be brought along on death notifications and things like that. And, it's really unfortunate that instead of having a secular counselor who might have degrees and actually be trained in this kind of thing, they just have a clergy member.
So instead of bringing in a trained mental health professional or someone who understands these sort of crises, you bring in someone who essentially communicates with spirits or ghosts. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, exactly.
To me. But back to In God We Trust on the police cars, I mean, what's the law actually say?
So as far as In God We Trust displays go, whether it's on a law enforcement vehicle or, your city council chambers or something like that, the law is unfortunately pretty bad. It's reached the federal appellate courts several times, and they always just say it's patriotic, it's ceremonial, it's not religious, don't worry about it, it's totally fine. So it really needs to be local activism rather than the court system for the most part with In God We Trust. And the only way we've seen these defeated is when, before the display goes up, there's a big community outcry against it.
Maddie Ziegler, staff attorney for the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Okay, so hands of protest go up, the FFRF letters go out, people are educated as to what the Constitution actually says, and the result, more police departments added In God We Trust to their cars. In April of last year, the Forney, Texas City Council approved a resolution to add In God We Trust to cars. A local sign owner said he would design and apply those decals for free, to get rid of the argument that this was a taxpayer burden, and pretty much just because he thinks it's awesome. Also jumping onto the bandwagon in the wake of Stone County, sheriff's departments in Scott County, Arkansas, LaFleur County, Oklahoma, Walthall County, Mississippi, and others. The organization, the Original Motto Project, reports that almost 250 U.S. law enforcement offices, almost 250 currently have In God We Trust displayed on their vehicles. And the folks at the Original Motto Project want to go back. They want to return to the original E pluribus unum, out of many, one. Now, I think it would be interesting to see the temperature of those who cheer In God We Trust as the police cars drive by. I think it would be really interesting to replace the presumably Christian incarnation with a God of a different name. I mean, imagine it. A law enforcement officer pulls up to the scene of a crime, and on the car bumper it says, In Allah We Trust. Imagine it. An officer's working a murder case after the killing of somebody you love. Their vehicle pulls up to the scene. It says, In Krishna We Trust. Imagine a police officer who's scheduled to show up at your child's school to talk about being a lawful and helpful and safe citizen of the community. On their vehicle in the parking lot in full view for all to see, it says, "In Shiva we trust. In Titan we trust. In Zeus we trust. In Satan we trust." Imagine how enthusiastic these supporters might be then. Well, of course, the reason that so many people are totally untroubled with the Christian God promoted by taxpayer-funded institutions is that, of course, they happen to line up with their particular God. The playing field totally slants in their direction. I think there is also a nobility for many in declaring that they're not just doing the people's work, but they're doing God's good work. There might be a sense of smug satisfaction, in branding the name of God on what you do. We've seen a lot of this throughout history. What about a feeling of divine protection while you're doing a very dangerous job? I mean, it is a very dangerous job. Any car you pull over at any hour of any day, any house you enter, any corner you turn, any person you meet, this could present you with a life and death scenario. And every single year, over 100 times, we see the tragic headlines bearing the words, "Killed in the line of duty." I can totally see it would be comforting to believe and declare that God watches over you, even as you arm yourself with a loaded firearm for your own protection, and you go through intense real-world training to avoid injury and death, and even then remain statistically just as apt as somebody of another religion or none on the force to end up as a tragic headline tomorrow. And this brings me to a short digression from the legal and constitutional aspects of religiosity and the police. What about those who cope with the monumental stresses of daily life in law enforcement, and they cope with a religious belief? They cope with a belief in God through prayer and meditation, talking to God, whatever. And with the comfort that, if their lives were to come to a violent end at any moment, it would not be the end, but instead they would walk into a next life, a heaven free of violence and pain and death. This is understandable. I don't think it's rooted in any way in reality, but I think it's understandable to see how some people might lean upon a private religious faith to sort of maintain in a difficult and dangerous career. But that, again, is a private expression. It's a private faith, a private belief protected by the Constitution. This is not supposed to spill over into policy, into institutional God speak that's being spouted by people that are supposed to be about all the people, we the people. Are the agents of a single privileged religious belief, Christianity, are they serving the people? Or are they, and even if they have the most noble intentions, are they betraying the very United States they have committed to defend? Well, this is a show dedicated to discussions about religion and the influence of religion in law enforcement. And starting right now, we're going to speak to police officers and former police officers about their own experiences and perspectives. I have Jeff on Skype. Jeff, you're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Seth.
What is your current profession?
I'm a full-time law enforcement officer. Bit of my background is I've worked patrol, detectives. I was a SWAT operator for 4 years and a honor guard member for 8, presiding over funerals and ceremonies and whatnot. So I've been doing this about 13 years, and it's been a good career.
Are you a religious man, Jeff?
No, I'm not.
Okay. And are your fellow officers religious people, Jeff?
The majority of, yes.
Okay. So what are we talking about? I mean, you're seeing overt displays of religiosity as far as like the police department, or just an individual private faith?
There's a little bit of both, especially regarding, elected officials like sheriffs and whatnot. Oftentimes around election season, you'll see more presentations to churches and religious groups. In law enforcement, there is definitely a Christian warrior type of theme, the Crusader, St. Michael kind of invocation of Christianity, but it's specifically Christianity for the most part.
I won't knock him for giving presentations in a church if it's, about how to protect yourself or here's what the law says. Is it that kind of thing? Here's what police officers do. Here's how you can better protect you and your family. Those kind of presentations?
Sometimes, but oftentimes they talk specifically regarding their own personal faith and how that affects, their personal lives and them as a political candidate.
So I picture somebody in uniform representing the police department standing behind a church podium giving their testimony?
There have been those speeches. You can find those online, very much so.
Talk to me about In God We Trust on these police cars. I opened the show talking about that. What are your thoughts on that, and have you been following the story?
Yeah, very much so. It comes up on my feeds and whatnot. As a police officer or peace officer, your duty is to the law. And also, you represent everyone in the community, and that is what we all profess all the time. And, in my area of Central California, there's, people of varied faiths from, polytheists, Southeast Asians to Hindus to Catholics, and, down the road we go. And I don't think that those statements, especially the invocations, belong on government vehicles. I'm a big proponent of separation of church and state, and I think our law enforcement agencies should also represent those.
As a detective, did you bump into any sort of weird religiosity in any of the cases you covered? I'm just curious.
A lot of the support groups for domestic violence and abuse are often Christian-based, and that way they've been very much helpful, but it's kind of comes at a cost. I mean, if you're going to go to a shelter or a home, there oftentimes comes with a sermon,
It's like a John 3:16 mission thing. Look, we have dinner and a warm blanket, but you have to listen to our 30-minute message about Jesus kind of deal.
Yeah, you're going to get an earful at some of the homes or shelters and that are available. That most of them, with the exception of just about only one of them in the area that I work, are religious based. Though they are very beneficial and they can be very helpful, I'm not sure if they always come at that with a little message about the Almighty.
Jeff, how many years you spend in SWAT?
4 years.
So, did you ever just, right before you breached a door, just hum the song,
Never.
Da-na-na, da-na-na, da-na-na. That's the song. That's the SWAT song. You never did it.
Never once. You're pretty focused. I never even said a prayer. I think that kind of always was a bit of a distraction.
Now, especially for my overseas listeners, describe what SWAT stands for and what it is and what it does, okay?
Special Weapons and Tactics. And basically, it's a specialized unit within law enforcement agencies that serve high-risk search warrants and perform high-risk arrests on dangerous subjects.
And you never once uttered a prayer, "Dear God, please keep me safe"?
No, I always found that kind of distracting. I think I always thought that my best way of self-preservation and was to be completely focused and in that moment and aware and not thinking of, hopefully I won't get hurt. That's always in the back of your head. But the main focus is on the task at hand.
Your fellow officers know you're a heathen, a non-believer, an atheist?
In the last about 5 or 6 years, more and more that's come out. It's caused a little bit of backlash for me in some cases.
In what way, though? How does that manifest itself, Jeff? Is it like just sort of surface stuff? Hey, we don't invite you over for dinner, or is it we don't have your back in the field?
No, nothing like that. It would be pushback that would be maybe it would be somewhat punitive in regards to your working status. So you might get a little more attention from your supervisor because you don't agree with him religiously. So it's some of that stuff. That's how it had kind of started for me in a conversation with an evangelical partner of mine. We just had a discussion, and it was very cordial, and we were friends before and friends after. And that had developed into about a 2-year process of kind of punitive backlash, and that was very unfortunate. because I really adore the agency that I work for.
We see it a lot in the private sector. Someone has a religious supervisor, and right between the letters of the law, right between the letters of discrimination law, you just sort of get skipped over. Maybe you're not considered as much for promotion or that kind of thing. And it's impossible in so many cases to prove intent. You just kind of know, right? You know the people you work with and for, right?
Yeah, everything was fine up until that discussion, and then things drastically changed.
You doing okay these days? Everything all right?
Yeah, very much so. I'm actually changing agencies, a different type of law enforcement, going into the supervision area of law enforcement, and I'm looking forward to that. It's what they call the other side, kind of.
Do they have a theme or something? I mean, if they don't have a theme, I don't think you should do the job. Like SWAT has a theme. If you can't sing the song if you can't hum it to yourself, you got to forgive me, Jeff. I have been weaned on decades of television shows about cops, which have to be nearly impossible for you to watch, right? I mean, every time, like I got a buddy who's a cop, every time a shot is fired and no one cares on television, he's like, all right, automatic suspension, investigation, paperwork, while the review's going on, blah, blah, blah. He's literally just like, this is crap. He can't even watch.
Right. It's so much like that, and it's so funny is that, I think J. Warner Wallace kind of has his shtick regarding, God's crime scene and whatnot. And he really kind of follows a bit of the Hollywood crime scene kind of beliefs. And, crime scenes are very, very different environments than what are often sold. And I think that's kind of depicted in some of his stuff.
Forensic shows are the same way. Like they wheel these people in to be examined in sort of this dark mood lighting. It looks like a disco or something. Just like you can't see. Yeah. It just makes no sense. But
right.
Whatever.
And all the pathologists have their elbows and their nose right there in the viscera, and it's like, no, that is not the case.
And they all look like supermodels. It's just, I'm sure it plays like that in real life, just like all the police officers do. So
they have very big budgets, and apparently they love leather pants, because every forensic person on those shows I've seen always has leather pants, perfectly coiffed hair, not the natural science nerd from college, with acne.
Well, I appreciate you and the work you do, and I will say this to every police officer that I speak to on the radio. I'm a fan of the police force. I know that they often get sort of the short end of the headlines when we see the bad apples out there, and we'll address that some more. But you have done and continue to do what is a difficult and often unpopular but necessary job, and you are greatly appreciated. So is your perspective and opinion, Jeff. So thank you much, and all success in your future endeavors, okay?
Best to you, Seth. Thank you.
Yeah, I can totally see. Jeff obviously does the job right. But I mean, if I was a member of SWAT, I was part of a SWAT team, Special Weapons and Tactics. I'm all decked out in all the regalia. I've got the Kevlar and I've got the helmet with is it called a blast shield, or do they just call it that in Star Wars? We'll call it a blast shield, and weapon drawn, and I'm surrounded by the SWAT team. We just got out of the SWAT van, and we're heading toward the house, the building, wherever, and we're getting ready to do something really dangerous. In my own mind, I would be, I think, under my breath going, da-na-na, 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 da-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. I mean, wouldn't you do that? Wouldn't most of us do that? Seems like a no-brainer to me. Here is an email from a woman who is currently employed at a law enforcement agency in Florida, whose name I will omit for the purposes of anonymity. She said, I worked at this law enforcement agency in Florida for 10 years now, and while some of my family members are officers, I myself am a civilian employee. I thought I'd share my personal experiences with religiosity in law enforcement, even though I'm not sworn. The funny thing is, I applied for a job at this agency back when my family attended church, and a church leader, who also happened to be high up in the administration here, suggested that I apply. Side note, that same church leader was later embroiled in a scandal involving an affair on agency time and was forced to end his career. For several reasons, I slowly backed away from the church and Christianity over the past decade, sometimes researching other religions and beliefs before finally deciding none of it felt right for me. I found your podcast 1 year ago thanks to an officer I happened to work with who's an atheist. It helped me feel less lonely to listen to your show and to know I'm part of a community, even though I may be an outsider within my own. Since then, I've only found a handful of my coworkers who are not at least semi-religious. I felt completely alone for a long time in my new beliefs or lack thereof. The majority of employees, and especially the administration at this agency, are overtly Christian. I've overheard ranking supervisors openly discussing scripture in the office more than once. Coworkers regularly say praise Jesus to any good news, and they credit God for any successes and, quote, trust Him in any hardships, including those of others, not stopping to consider that maybe I don't thank God for my pay raise. I thank the people who made it happen. At the start of just about every agency event, such as employee awards or swearing-in ceremonies, there's always a Christian invocation or blessing. There was even a prayer said at my birthday lunch that sworn coworkers threw for me in the office, and not wanting to seem ungracious, I didn't say anything. I'm often told that my boyfriend and I are, quote, living in sin, because we dare to cohabitate without being legally married. This is said jokingly to avoid any ramifications, and yes, we have "In God We Trust" on our patrol vehicles. The amount of Christian influences within everyday operations can be very alienating to anyone who doesn't follow that set of beliefs. I think there may be more non-believers here than I'm aware of, but they simply feel that if they were to be open about their beliefs, it could hurt their career or chances of advancing within the agency. I think if our agency wasn't located in the southern part of the U.S., maybe it wouldn't be so prevalent. I've also observed that in jobs that are high risk, such as law enforcement, military, firefighters, etc., religion often finds its way in because ultimately people are scared, deep down. And I think it's a very human tendency to seek the protection of a higher power, knowing the dangers you may face every day. Don't get me wrong, I love my job and my law enforcement family. I feel like I have a unique perspective on law enforcement as an insider, but still a civilian. Cops are just people. There are good ones and there are bad ones. I feel confident in saying that regardless of their beliefs, most of the officers I know are great people who try their best to do what is right and who would give you the shirt off their back if you needed it. I can say the same of the few atheists I know personally. I try to be a good person and a good employee, and I'm increasingly becoming more open with my lack of faith so that I can challenge any preconceived notions my religious coworkers may have about atheists being evil people. During prayers at work, I used to bow my head reverently, even though I don't pray. But now that I know I'm not alone, I'm more comfortable quietly holding my head up and winking at the fellow atheists in the room. Thank you for what you do. And then she signs the email, and thank you so much for sharing your perspective for the show. It means a great deal. On the switchboard, I have a police officer. Is that your title? How do I address your position within law enforcement?
Police officer is just fine.
You have asked that we not give your name because you're currently involved as an active duty police officer. And so I just want to respect your privacy and make sure none of this comes back on you.
I appreciate that.
Are you a religious person? No?
I am not. I'm an atheist. I was a Christian until I was 40 years old, indoctrinated into the church. My history is a lot like yours.
I was going to say, we could hang out, man. Yeah, you and I could sit back and talk, right?
I love to listen to you talk about the 80s Christian rock because I was fully embedded in that whole scene and loved Stryper and Bloodgood and White Cross and all those guys. And
we thought we were so cool, didn't we? We were like, yeah, man, we're rocking for the king, dude. You know, those other people are rocking for the devil.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Did you ever do any concerts? You ever go to those shows? You know, we're all like fist in the air. I mean, these white bread, corn-fed Protestant Christian kids are out there. We're rebels for Jesus, man. Did you ever do that?
I actually got a front row at a Striper concert. My brother caught one of their little Bibles that had their sticker on it.
They used to throw Bibles into the audience. That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
and I think he may still have that to this day.
I wish I'd kept mine. It's just a weird collector's item that it brings back memories of my youth. You know, Striper's still around. They're still singing. I don't think they still dress in the yellow and black, but they're out there somewhere. You know, the Geezer Tour 2017 Striper is out there. When did you get into law enforcement? When did you become a cop?
I was 25. It was back in the 90s, 1995. And I've been with the same agency since then.
You were a believer then when you joined the force?
Absolutely. And
you doing God's good work out there? Is that the deal? I mean,
no, that was never it. I just enjoyed the action, I guess you could call it, the adventure of the job. Every day was a different day, but no, I didn't get fully involved. There are some who they want to help. They want to bring people to God and increase his fold and all that. And I was never that type of person.
Did becoming a cop change your perceptions of what you thought it was?
Yeah. I was horribly naive and a little bit immature. Grew up in a larger city and then moved to a very rural area. And everybody knows you and you know everybody and you know the deepest, darkest secrets of people. And I never thought that I'd ever see some of the things that I saw. Yeah, it changes you quickly.
I had a buddy who was a cop. We went on a ride-along. I don't know if they still do those, but this was 20 years ago. You sign a consent form that says if something bad happens to me, it's not the police department's fault, but then I get to be a passenger and ride along in kind of an all-day thing. And I remember the guy was telling me that the hardest stuff for him was the domestic stuff. Every day going into a home and seeing families tear each other apart, to him was like a burden that he carried with him all the time.
I try to divest myself from the job every night. So
Can you flip that switch? I mean, is that doable?
Yeah, it is. You can become very, very calloused very quickly. After only a few years, I was kind of done with it. I do my best to absolutely help people, but it's too many times they will not help themselves, and it's not your fault. So you just roll on.
Talk to me about religiosity in police departments, or at least from your experience, your police department experience. Is there a lot of God going on, and how does that manifest itself?
Well, I think where I live is probably a lot like yours, where Christianity is just embedded in the culture here. So it naturally leaks into anywhere you work just about, but especially in the police force here. You learn in the academy that it's God first, then country, then family, and then the agency.
No, your family gets a nice slot there on the third rung after
rung.
God and country.
Absolutely. But I think everybody makes an assumption that everybody is a Christian. So I don't have a lot of people trying to get me to go to church. They just assume I already go to church, and I did for a long, long period of time. People in the community, they never ask you, do you go to church? It's always, what church do you go to? Assuming that you are, in fact, a Christian also. So,
from your perspective, how many of these people do you think were serious about their faith, and how many people were they just clock in on Sunday, go to church, and then back to their regular lives?
I think that's the majority of it, the second on the ladder there. Even, within the community, within the people I work with, they put up a false front. But, when it comes right down to it, I don't know if they actually believe it in their heart, but they don't certainly live that life that they profess outside of the interaction with the public or interaction with other people.
You see any instances or examples where you felt like religiosity was detrimental, like it really was a problem? Do you ever become cognizant of that?
No, I don't. I don't see it as being detrimental at all. We're not preached to. We're not, we're not treated any differently.
So you're not evangelizing. These people aren't out there evangelizing from their positions as law enforcers, right?
No, I've never seen that. I've never been to a scene where somebody's. I have heard of situations in other places where officers will evangelize to people at a domestic and bring them to Christ. And I've never seen that. I've never witnessed that. I've never even heard of any of my coworkers doing anything like that.
You think there's a difference between how, say, a Christian police officer might treat someone in a Muslim home or an atheist home, the non-Christian? Is there any sort of that going on, do you think? Or are all people handled fairly and equally?
It seems everybody's treated fairly and equally. I have never seen anything. But then again, as I said before, it seems that everybody makes the assumptions, but everybody's a Christian. So
that many Christians? You just assume it?
Yeah. Some people say that there are, more churches than people?
Sometimes I think it. You can throw a rock in my town, you hit 3 churches, they just ricochet off each other.
And it's the same here.
I'm just curious, since we're talking, and I've got a few minutes, I love internet radio because we can take the time. I'm not having to rush off, between commercial breaks and all this. But, have you ever felt in mortal danger? Have you ever been at a point where you were like, I'm really on the line here?
I tell people often that I may have lived the most boring career, and then I have to knock on wood because...
Isn't it true that most police officers rarely ever even pull their weapon?
That is true. Absolutely. I would say it's a very small percentage that actually ever draw their gun, let alone actually have to fire it. And I have never been in a situation. I've been in situations that I was scared, and now I look back and think how funny it is because there wasn't really any reason.
Well, the unknown, though, in hindsight, you realize there may not have been any danger, but when you're walking into an unknown situation, no matter how much training you've got, your heart's probably jacked, right?
Oh, yeah. I tell people this story. Probably the most afraid I've ever been on the job was, it was a domestic call where they had hung up on 911. I get to the house. It's as far away from a city center as it can possibly be. I get there, it's a locked gate. I have to walk almost a half a mile in the middle of the night. There's a thunderstorm coming towards me, and I hear a pack of wild dogs running down a hill towards me. And that is absolutely the scariest I've ever been because I thought, well, I'll not even get to this complaint because I'm going to get mauled by dogs. And as they come down and they get to my feet, of course, they're the friendliest dogs you could ever.
I was going to say, that's a movie, right? I think I've seen this film, something like that.
They just wanted to lick me to death. They didn't want to maul me to death. So.
You feel like cops get a bad rap out there?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In 20 years, I've seen the culture change against police. And I came on right after Rodney King. And there was a negative feeling about police officers. And things seemed to improve, especially after 9/11. We seem to be in the good graces of the public, and then most specifically after Ferguson. You
feel like that police culture is paying a price for the worst headlines out there?
We're finding that we were already having a difficult time filling our ranks. People just simply don't want to do the job, and after Ferguson, it's even worse. They've had to lower standards to bring people in because we just simply can't find people to hire.
This is not something we as the public wants to hear, man.
I know.
We want the highest of standards for law enforcement.
Absolutely.
You're saying they're lowering the bar because it's not a profession that people are seeking the way they sought it, say, 20, 30 years ago?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I got on, there were 5,000 applicants. They took 100, and only 60 graduated the academy. That's a very small percentage from where you start. Now, we might get 200 to 300 applicants, and they've had to lower standards just to fill classes. Education standards. The other thing was if you ever smoked pot, you could never get in. And now, as long as you're not testing positive at the selection process, they just ignore it. So
Yeah, it may take you an extra couple seconds to aim, but I mean, other than that, you're doing okay, right?
That's right.
Hey, man, just mellow out. There's no reason for everybody to be so agitated. Just hang on just a second. I have to ask this. I'll probably ask this of several other people, and then I'll let you get on with your day. But you've had to have seen some bad apples. Come on. I mean, we're talking about people in a position of authority and power. There are some people who get off on being cops, and I don't want to let them off the hook. I mean, you've seen some shitty human beings in uniform, yeah?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's a statistic that 10% of the population is criminally insane, and it's going to actually bleed into police forces. You'll find people who get the job, and it's a small percentage. I mean, I don't even think 10% because they usually can weed them out. But yeah, there is a small percentage of officers who do get into the job specifically for the power trip.
And how do the rest of you guys deal with that?
Well, we usually laugh at them, and that usually mellows them out. If they see that the rest of the officers don't dig that power trip, they change their ways.
They're not getting the affirmation. They're not getting validated by the rest of you guys.
Exactly. And I've run into very few. In fact, I can't really, off the top of my head, think of anybody that we ever had to alter their path. I work with a great bunch of guys. I don't think any of them know I'm an atheist. they don't seem to mind if they do.
Well, thanks for the work you do. Cops, I think, often do get kind of a bad rap out there. It's fashionable in many ways for people to speak in blanket language about law enforcement officers. But, you do a tough job, and you do an often unappreciated job. You see, in many ways, a lot of the worst, and you deal with it and somehow manage to live lives of your own. So thank you for putting yourself out there for the work that you do, and thanks for your perspective on the show. It means a lot.
I appreciate it. Thanks for talking to me.
I have an email here from a female police officer who has asked to remain anonymous because she is still a police officer and was concerned that if she had called the show, that people might recognize her voice, somebody somewhere, and it might get back to her department, her supervisors. And so she has written this letter. It says, I've been a police officer in Ohio for 15 years. I work for a smaller department where most are devout Christians and or Catholic. I consider myself an atheist, born and raised here in a Catholic family. I never really bought into it, and I've been a lifelong skeptic. I do see the comfort that religious belief provides to many. But to me personally, I believe that overall it's detrimental to our moral progress and the advancement of humanity. I see how it causes so much harm and stunts growth. My semi-out atheism is a source of tension in my family. At work, a couple officers know and view my non-belief as pretty crazy. They're the type who've never even considered that their faith might not be true. Some of the things I've witnessed at my own department and others in the area truly blow my mind. In past years, we've had a chief who began every meeting with a prayer circle where we were expected to hold hands and pray. Completely inappropriate and ridiculous. Of course, the only God I've ever heard mentioned was Jesus and the Christian God. I found this to be quite presumptuous, but I just kept silent. It takes a lot to bother me, so again, I choose my battles. While I adamantly oppose this type of thing, I can also easily ignore it and move on with my day. I also want to say I do think if I spoke up and conveyed my opposition that they would be accommodating and on the surface say the right things, but I would worry about possible different treatment in the future. So I would rather just play along and keep my feelings to myself. I want to be viewed in a positive light by upper management, of course, and continue to receive new opportunities. I've seen how a lot of devout Christians react. When you tell them you're an atheist, they look at you like you're in a pact with the devil. I'd rather stay clear of those types of misperceptions from those who are in charge of my livelihood. I'm sure you understand. Some of us are also paid to attend a yearly ceremony called the Blessing of the Badge, where officers place their badge on a table, and then a Christian pastor prays over them for Jesus to bless them and keep us safe. There is gospel music and preaching. Really, this happens. I actually enjoy the music as an art form and appreciate the talent, but not the message. When I've attended it, per being scheduled to attend, I just try to keep a straight face the whole time. I'm secretly wondering, am I the only one in here who thinks this is crazy and unbelievably inappropriate and offensive to other officers who might be religious but not Christian? Our old chief also used to have Bible quotes attached to their email at the bottom. So no matter what emails went out to whom, the quotes automatically were there. This was their work email. Now, I will say that if the Southern trend of placing "In God We Trust" decals on the backs of police cruisers ever come to my city, that I would speak up against. I would definitely not be able to keep my mouth shut on that, and I would oppose it vehemently. So far, I don't see that up here yet, though. There is much more diversity up here. I've commented a few times on police department Facebook pages or other pages supporting law enforcement when they've posted about those decals. There will be hundreds or thousands of comments supporting the God decals and maybe 10 comments opposing it. And then the God mob comes after you if you oppose it. If you don't like it, get out of this Christian nation type of comments. It's surreal and disturbing. These, quote, good Christians telling you how despicable you are. Yet on any other post, if they knew you were a fellow police officer, they would be kind and loving and refer to you as their sister or brother. I'm thankful daily that I'm in the North. I can't even imagine what non-believing officers deal with in the South. I'm a huge fan and follower of black non-believers and the work of Mandisa Thomas. As a white female atheist police officer who cares very deeply about black lives, it's extremely depressing to watch the death and destruction taking place in inner city areas that are majority black. I recently attended her lecture when she came to Cleveland, where she talked about how the church is detrimental to the black community, and I agree with her. At the same time, I cannot voice these views openly. Blacks who want to leave their religion or church face so much hardship. It's ingrained in their culture and history. Just last week, several juveniles were shot in Cleveland. One 12-year-old was killed. The community responds with prayer vigils and pastor-led rallies. It's the same nightmare on repeat over and over again, but no change, no progress. I wish I had all the answers, but I do not. Outreach and education is key, but while bringing up God and Jesus is very accepted when dealing with people in my line of work, especially when officers have the best of intentions and are trying to help people turn their lives around, preaching atheism is not. Religion seems to have a huge and very tight hold on the field of law enforcement. I've seen so many hardened older cops who've seen things most could not even imagine. Horrible, terrible things, the worst things you could imagine. They fall to their knees in prayer. They say their faith is stronger than ever. Their faith helped them through their careers. They welcome a new baby and proclaim God is so good. Same with surviving an injury, gunshot wounds, and illness. They praise God and give Him the credit. I'll never understand, Seth. Because when I see suffering, when I see or hear of a severely abused child, a raped baby, innocent victims of ruthless brutality, all I think of is how fucking obscene such God worship and belief is. I think to myself, how dare they praise a God who chose not to intervene? If anything, my career has solidified my non-belief and my disgust for such a God, even if they were proven to exist. The self-centeredness of it all is repugnant, even though they don't even realize or intend it. Most are good, hard-working, selfless officers who just happen to be born into a Christian family and have believed what they were taught their entire lives. It is such a disconnect, but it's so hard to reach people and make them see. Thanks so much for submitting your perspective on this, and thanks for doing the work, the very difficult work that you do. You're greatly appreciated. Had a message in from Daniel. Daniel said, I was a deputy sheriff in Colorado working in the county detention center for 7 years. I never noticed anything overly religious while I worked in the department. No deputy Bible studies or anything like that. Most of the deputies kept their religious beliefs to themselves because in that environment you didn't want to share too much about yourself that may compromise your ability to do your job. In the detention center, the only real religious thing that was apparent was our disdain for the religious groups that would visit the facility. Invariably, everyone became religious during their stays. Religious meeting turned into contraband passing sessions where we'd have to search everyone either going to services or coming from services. We eventually had to break up when services were and rotate the people who could go to break up information and contraband being passed. I'm sure these people felt they were doing God's will, but more often than not, they were just making our lives difficult. Another thing that became a common problem was religious diets. Because of the dietary restrictions for Judaism and Islam, they were given a special TV dinner type of meal which was different from the normal meals that were served. During the time when I worked there, the chaplain had to change the rules for qualifying for the meals because so many people were claiming religious meals and either couldn't say what the restrictions were or did not attend the related services when they were offered. Of course, we also had the inmates who claimed they believe or maybe truly did believe and were relying on God to save them from their trial or give them a lesser sentence. Of course, these would also be the ones that would swear on a stack of Bibles that God changed their lives while they were in jail. Sometimes it would be so much you just smile and nod politely and just move on with your day. I worked with one deputy who was an exception to the not talking about religion. He was not religious, or if he had been, it was long ago. He was of a mind that if inmates actually believed half as much as they talked about believing, they wouldn't be in jail. Daniel, thanks for sharing that. It doesn't relate, I think, directly to the police force, but it does relate to law enforcement, and I think it's interesting. Thanks for sharing it. Short break. When I come back, we're going international. I have police officers giving their perspectives from outside of the United States. We'll get into that in just a second. Okay, you want to see something slick? Right now, go to harrys.com/thethinkingatheist. Okay, harrys.com/thethinkingatheist, and just check out Harry's custom and limited edition shaving sets. Just check them out. Not only have you just solved holiday gift buying for pretty much every guy on your list, you're giving something they will actually use and love. Harry's sets come with German-engineered 5-blade cartridges for a close, smooth, comfortable shave, Harry's foaming shave gel, special limited edition winter chrome and emerald green handles. You can personalize with engraving. They're delivered in these beautifully designed gift boxes, and the gift sets start at just $10. Over 3 million guys have switched to Harry's, including me, because I get a premium shave at a fantastic value. And as a special offer for my listeners, I have partnered with Harry's over the holidays to give you $5 off your order when you go to harrys.com/thethinkingatheist. This holiday, give Harry's and give handsome. Get your holiday shopping done early and take advantage of free shipping. To get a limited edition holiday shave set while supplies last, go to harrys.com/thethinkingatheist right now. That's harrys.com/thethinkingatheist. My patrons on Patreon get a commercial-free show every week and a bonus broadcast every month. I'm always hugely thankful for my sponsors, but I'm also thankful for my patrons. If you'd like to become a patron of the broadcast, your support's welcome at patreon.com/Seth Andrews. This is a broadcast called To Protect and to Serve Religion and Law Enforcement. We're talking about religiosity in the police, and we're not limiting that discussion to the police here in the United States. I have Richard on Skype. Richard, you're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. How's it going?
Not too bad, my friend. Not too bad. Long-time listener, finally first-time caller.
You are or were a police officer?
I was.
In what capacity?
4 weeks ago, I left the police in the UK. I was a frontline police officer for 14 years. I worked in frontline response, community policing, and roads policing. And as I say, I left the job 4 weeks ago to take up a position in the wonderful world of academia, lecturing in policing.
As you were dialing in from the UK, have you studied the American police as opposed to the police or policing where you're from and the contrast between?
I have. Part of my studies during my time as a student, we did a lot of comparisons between the United States and the UK. I have a few contacts with police departments across the United States. I even had the pleasure of doing a ride-along a few years ago with a small city police department out in California a few years ago.
And? I mean, what are your thoughts? Come on, be honest. What do you think?
It's very different. Let's just say there was a tension in the air when I was out with the American police that I never felt in all my years of policing in the UK. I mean, to give you some idea, when I went on my ride-along, we got into the police cruiser and I sat in the front passenger seat. And the officer who I was out with got into me and said, okay, Richard, there's the shotgun, there's the release catch, and if you need it, just take it and use it. Now, is that
legal?
I don't know, which is why I'm mentioning...
You're an observer, man.
I know, I'm mentioning no names.
All right, cool.
But the thing is, I mean, as a lot of people actually realise, is the vast majority of British police officers, and myself included, don't carry guns. I've been a police officer for 14 years. I have never fired a gun in my entire life, and I've only ever touched one during a session at our public order training centre just to familiarise ourselves with weapons.
Well, Richard, I mean, come on. I mean, if there's a hail of explosions behind you and you're bearing down on a perp and you're screaming, freeze, dirtbag, like they do on televisions, and you don't have a gun, what do you point in the perp's direction? You know, this is a dilemma for me. Like, what's your weapon of choice, my friend?
My voice.
And I wouldn't tangle with it either.
We talk to people. I mean, I say, when I did my tour of the police station in the States, everybody looked at me and said, how do you do your job without a gun? And I said, well, actually, quite easily. You talk to people. The vast majority of people are compliant. If you do get someone that resists, we do have our tactical options. You know, we have our incapacitant spray, we have a baton. But most of the time, we talk to people. And I've had a couple of roll-arounds on the floor with people, but nothing major. I mean, my old team, we used to raid crack houses and no weapons needed.
Educate me, Richard. What are the gun laws in London? Or, you know, are any firearms permitted anywhere, or are they all illegal? What?
Pretty much all illegal.
Okay.
Handguns, completely illegal. What you would call assault weapons, completely illegal. What weapons that are legal are things like shotguns and small caliber rifles, which are very, very, very strictly regulated. The shotguns and rifles, generally speaking, are only used by people that require them for their professions, things like gamekeepers, farmers, pest control people. And we do have the occasional sport shooters who go clay pigeon shooting, again, with shotguns. But again, with the regulations, only 2 barrels, no pump actions, and you can be inspected at any time to make sure that you're storing them properly in properly locked containers.
Wait a minute. Hang on. I got to come back to pest control.
Yep.
What kind of roaches are we talking about? I mean, what are we talking about?
We're talking to things like rabbit infestations, those sorts of things. Well,
so lethal force against bunnies is fine, but you go into a crack house and you don't need a gun. It's just a culture that many of us find intriguing and sort of strange and kind of amazing. So, talk to me about religiosity in the police force from your perspective in London. Have you seen anything of interest? What do you think?
I've come across a number of colleagues over the years who were religious, but one of the things I think, and this is a thing with the UK in general, although we don't have a constitutional separation of church and state like you guys actually do have, religion is not a major thing in this country. In fact, it's often considered rather impolite to bring it up in general conversation with people. So it isn't a major issue in the UK. I do have colleagues that are religious, but their religiosity is usually a very, very minor thing. I mean, I've known people for years. I couldn't tell you one way or the other whether they were religious or not. I've got a very large number of colleagues that are totally irreligious and as irreligious as you or I. In fact, quite a few. But again, that reflects the makeup now of British society.
That sounds extremely refreshing, Richard. I'm just saying.
We do, as I say, we do have colleagues from all sorts of religions as well. I mean, it's not like Christianity is a big stick that people get hit with. We have numerous staff associations covering all sorts of religions. I've got friends who are in the Association of Muslim Police, the Jewish Police Association, the Sikh Police Association, the Hindu Police Association, and everybody, for the most part, gets on really, really well. I mean, it's the coexist sticker writ large. The one unifying thing is we're all police officers and we have a job to do for the public.
So, as an American, I was weaned on police shows from Adam 12 to TJ Hooker, NYPD Blue. You know what I'm saying? I mean, cop shows are part and parcel of the culture, and they all, there's a lot of car chases and violence, and there's a lot of action, so to speak. From your perspective as a London or former London police officer, talk to me about what real police life is like as opposed to the fictionalized, the romanticized, perhaps, version of police life that most of the public sees.
Most of it's pretty routine stuff. If you're on a response team at the moment, things are very, very busy, but that's due to reductions in numbers that we're currently suffering. But that's another issue. You can get calls for service, what we call 999 calls, sort of your equivalent of a 911 call. But it's pretty mundane stuff. The occasional fight in a pub, kids hanging around street corners, domestic violence issues, which are often can be quite harrowing. Usual calls to shops for thieves that have been caught, reports to burglaries, the occasional report of a robbery. It's pretty much day to day. There's not much in the way of car chases. There's not much in the way of explosions. It's pretty. And then of course there's always the endless paperwork that you have to complete once you've to file a report. Now it's and if you arrest somebody, well, that's you used up for the rest of the shift because of the notes you've got to do, the crime report you've got to do, if you've got to do the suspect interview, whether you get permission to charge them or not, case files.
It'd be a very boring movie.
Yeah.
Boring movie,
Yeah.
Richard. I'm just saying. Now, I'm being facetious. Obviously, I know. It's like I had a buddy who's a paramedic. He said it's like hours upon hours of tedium and boredom, and then a few minutes of adrenaline and, excitement's not the word I'm looking for, but it's just really intense, and then there's more boredom to follow.
Yeah.
It's very random. It's compounded by the fact that you are both necessary, needed, and in many ways rejected and despised all at the same time.
Yes.
People love cops, people despise cops. The weird duality going on.
Yeah, I mean, from my experiences, from what I've seen, is the iconic image of the British Bobby is one of those universally loved icons. And for the most part, that it's a romanticized view of what policing is about. I mean, I once was on foot patrol, again in central London. I was wearing the beat duty helmet. Yes, we do wear them when we're out on foot patrol. And I ended up coming across a known thief who'd just stolen a bottle of booze from one of the local shops. And it was in a quite heavily touristy area. And I think there were a number of tourists that were incredibly shocked to see me sort of having to wrestle the guy to the ground as he started resisting me. And there was I sort of wearing my big hat, and they're thinking, the friendly Bobby, which of course I am, I was. And to see that and me taking control of the situation and having to be fairly assertive whilst doing it surprised people.
I've met you, Richard. I think we met a few years ago at a conference.
We did in Boston.
And you're a towering guy. Like you could register you as a as a lethal weapon. I mean, you could do that, and I think it would be okay. I wouldn't tangle with you, is all I'm saying.
You'd be surprised. You should be surprised the people that would. Mostly involving. It's usually after they've had a few drinks.
Well lubricated and ready to rumble. You know what I mean? Richard, I appreciate you, your years of service, your perspective for the show. It's a pleasure to talk to you again, my friend, and we'll be in touch real soon, okay?
No problem. Before I go, could I just put out a quick shout out to my friends in the Metropolitan Police Humanist Association? They're a fairly new group that managed to get themselves recognised. You can find them on Twitter and Facebook. It just shows a little bit of progress, how those of us in the non-religious community within the police have come in the fact that we now do have our own association. So I just wanted to give a little bit of a shout out to them and wish them all the best as they take the association forward.
Fantastic. What's the name of the group again?
It's called the Metropolitan Police Humanist Association.
All right, my friend, we'll look it up. Thanks again, Richard. All my best.
Thank you, my friend. I hope to see you again sometime soon.
On Skype, I have Pierre, who is dialing in from Canada. Pierre, thank you so much for being a part of the broadcast. Great to have you.
Thank you for having me, Seth.
Most of what I've been speaking about here on the broadcast has been about police and law enforcement in the United States. So let's talk Canada. What's your experience there?
Well, Seth, I was a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police for a little more than 10 years. And I've worked everywhere in Canada, going from the West Coast to the East Coast to the Central region, which are mostly where the big cities in Canada are located. And through my experience, I've seen bleeding of religion within the police force and the traditions and the day-to-day policing experience, if you want, from a police officer's perspective. The first thing that I've noticed is going to the RCMP Academy in Regina, Saskatchewan. There is an actual mandatory church service that you have to attend before being able to graduate from the academy, before being sworn in as an officer. And through that church service, they basically explain how we are named into the religious concept of a good and evil, right or wrong, and we're there to, protect the good old citizen from the bad criminals, and that all this had some sort of a link to the Christian doctrine, which Canada was founded upon. And that's kind of what was brought forward during our training. From there, as you know, when you attend court, you are expected to either swear on the Bible or affirm. However, it is expected that you will be swearing on the Bible. The Bible is present. It's something that is seen as being concrete, something traditional. From personal experience, asking to affirm, I got a lot of pauses and kind of someone almost asking you if you are sure you want to do this, son. Maybe the other option would be a better option. And that's what I've seen as a police officer. There is a strong expectation that you're a member of the community, and community for a lot of places goes through from the church service, from the religious perspective.
What if you were to decline the service? I'm not going. Would you then not graduate from the academy?
No. However, not attending church, I'm not sure if that actually ever happened. They present the option, and I've done my training in the beginning of the 2000s. So it's introduced as something that is not so religious anymore, more of a traditional nature. However, you do have the chaplain in front of you and reading passages from the Bible. And that is part of your graduation protocol. The same as doing a mock trial, doing the final parade. That church service is part of graduating.
Pierre, you're going to have to forgive me, but I'm, looking up from way down here in the Bible Belt of Oklahoma, USA. You say Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and I have this vision. I have this image in my mind, the Mounties. Everybody's on horseback and, they're blowing the bugle. And forgive me, okay? Forgive me for having just sort of the caricature, but describe the Royal Canadian Mounted Police for the rest of us, would you?
Of course, the Mounties, the RCMP, the force as it's called, is an organization that is covering every provinces and territories of Canada. They offer municipal, provincial, or equivalent of state and federal policing services, including VIP protection, such as protecting the Canadian Prime Minister or the American President, if he or maybe in the future she decides to visit our beautiful country. The RCMP goes from the patroller on the street of, for example, Red Deer, Alberta, up to being in Ottawa, protecting, as I said, VIPs or doing international investigation. The image of the Mountie you see still exists in 2 ceremonies and so on, but not so much in the day-to-day life.
But you're an active police force.
Absolutely, and they wear all the equipment that a normal police force would be wearing, and the red uniform would be for ceremonial purposes only.
As a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, you ever have a sticky situation? You ever get yourself in a place where you were like, hey, I'm in danger or anything like that? Any anecdotes or stories our listeners would find compelling?
The life of a police officer goes between different milestones. Your first arrest, your first big investigations, your first time you get destroyed by a defense attorney on the stand. These are all kind of little stories that to police officers are very significant. For a member of the public might be something, that is not even worth the wait. But in my case, I can tell you my first arrest involved a foot chase in the back street of Banff, Alberta, in a beautiful winter evening, running like I've been running at the academy for 6 months, and eventually stopping in front of the suspect, who was out of breath and decided to just let go. And as a young cadet, not a clue what I'm supposed to do at this point. I have the guy in front of me, is not even controlled, not even handcuffed. And the only thing I managed to tell him is, can we please wait for my trainer to come and tell me what I'm supposed to do?
I've captured you. Can we hang out till we sort of get instructions? Are you currently in the force or retired or moved on or what?
I've decided to move on to bigger and better things, let's put it this way. I've had a fantastic opportunity to move on while still at the prime, if you want, of my career. And now I'm working onto a different field and better family life. And
sure,
obviously,
I get that.
Yeah.
As you've moved on, though, you still look and see this sort of problem of religiosity in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police happening even today.
Of course, and it's part of the culture itself. And now in Canada, we do have a very liberal relationship with religion. It's an inclusive country, so we like to say. But within the tradition of the force, you still see the bleedings of religion and the high influence it has on the day-to-day operations. Also, the model of policing that is put forward in Canada is based on the Sir Robert Peel principles, which a police officer needs to be a member of the community they serve. Through that, there is always that pressure of, if you are in a more rural area or a more conservative area, that religion is part of that community, and it's almost a mandatory thing to attend the church service or participate in the various events that a certain church might organize. So that pressure remains within the police force, and now it's more possibly oriented towards the community in which you serve, but it's still very present and is still regarded as being essential for the work of a police officer.
Pierre, thanks for the sort of inside scoop there, and congratulations on this next chapter. Thanks for the service. How many years were you in the force again?
A little more than 10.
10 years?
Yes.
And all my best in your new endeavors. Sounds like exciting things are happening in your life and your neck of the woods. Fantastic.
Thank you very much for having me, Seth.
That's it for the show today. If you're confronted with an instance of religion bleeding into law enforcement in a way that you feel violates the law, the Constitution, whatever, the FFRF is a great resource. I would encourage you to contact their legal department. You can go to ffrf.org for that. I'll be back here next week. I'm going to interview the secular jihadists from the Middle East. That's right. As we approach Christmas, we're going to get in the Christmas spirit by talking to ex-Muslims. And they're awesome. You're going to have a great time. I'll see you back here next week.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.